Tini kat Johan kan cheese ya ti chakuk sawe away Johan ach tu ke wuchin khasati ya khana kan cheese ye awatling get dati chakachtune ya khana shukhaya tuasaku yi yu qatangi awe khwa akhi dasa kai shikit ya atcha dad adadunei awe qa dukha ye awe achtuasaku khwa akhi yid khwa ya yidat chadusa dutuasaku yiwatani Jachan kanani qaqa yuqatan ganashish adusa yanduani ganashish
Saq kudzi yan shukaye kuhlek shitka kadach awe khat disi nach sandi kha khati klech yayagi saq kudzi tuwa in awe yak ta shuka dak ya utuwa kuh Acha shukat Christ shuwe ade utuwa kuh Sakutsi to khash ata shayed kahade to in Waksh khash awe ushif mas aga khe uwada awe kochte ya nitu koch we ya yagi kat nadak sak kodzi yan kawadlan shak su yak sakat nadak yati dagaqa uhan wech nech tuas in we sukhodzi Achtahini Chaka Mulchich Chasain Nuch in Ta'ahum Dakahiri Dach Nach H Dech Dis Sakhodzi Yesu Yak A Chagwat Bin Sa Tlech Yis Ye Utit Awe A Atz Egg
okay cheese achtu ye ke khawi sa akhi ya yuqatangi ke khawe kan cheese iti aqaq tuasaku ya yidat ya kana jukhaya haqasti adusatsu
Yake ekwasatini. Dasa itwa. Kuakan dlei tahini. Kunskagak. De at gai audu wask. Kle achya chachwuk. Kuakan yik adi dul gis nuch. Dlei lat us. Kach och achlakash. Kach duid yat nahen. We kach kan kach ke sain. Ne not saying. Nadach kach yati. Shaka ne shik. Yasik kaga ach. Tuch id. Yach. Ja doet ich kach it. It kunst ich.
Okay, kan cheese ka Atsuach tu ye ke sa akhi kan cheese
خط أي جاوك أوه كوات لتوم إي حس ودشي سوقنين غاسي يه كلا كأخليك كأخلاوك كوات لتووه ستي خاش هستوين كخونيك أوه كونك يك كوات لتووه أوه يوان كونك يك كات سوقنين كلاوك يجي كات سوقنين توا سجو خواهاي ويكا شادا هني أوي أخليلك ييوكا كات سوقنين جوك نخ غاتوسا كلاوك ييوكا كات سوقنين غاتوس كات سوقنين غاتوس شوخوا أخليلك ييوكا جنة أوس داخ أخليلك ييوكا كيك دا كاجي كا كا إيتي نخ خط يتي كلا أيوة ووز كات جي سلقوي أوه كات جي سخوي أوه سلقنين كخوك إيتي نخ يتي تسو كلاوك ييوكا شوت إيدا سكايدوج كلا ييوكا كات سلقنين كاتلا تسوك سكايدوج ويكا شادا هني أخليلك ييوكا Plainly yanwu إيه كلا ييوكا تلكات يوان ييوكا يك خاش هستو كخونيك غنالجيش إيدشي تلكات كا هستو تو يك كها شاوخك هوتشوه
Okay, good cheese. Okay, ja, يسكتني كن الشيش. تقوي أختو استقوي يوهان. كنا خوكي.
I'm shy. Nase good. Welcome. Eat ke yan yuaha. Eat yan yuaha. Khat aya asi. Yata wa at dasawe ikha. Khat kaka. Khatka. Goodness cheese.
Okay, good cheese. وصا يا يطلق لكت يوهان. Okay, أدو سا.
Okay. At dus iyi kuchshitan at chacha kuchshitan. Achshat Springfield ade kuatin. Yakyin Portland de kuchte ya kukwatin. Dujiyis a kukwasa I. Sin ka broccoli ka zucchini ka sweet peppers ka snow peas has chakwas u has chak
Guk klas ook echt aan. Zo utli at kwasa e. Shude haha adayu tucha tank etsk. Ske hun daka hidide ya nakhakuch itinach chat yati. Kakwa hit shakde. Guk. Gulchish.
Hey, good. Okay, gedeen kaishikit, kechawe. Tsukagaya, he did. Okay. What's that?
Saya Sandy ki dulkach ki sakunin nawe. Sakunin ka hook ka hin ka ik ka linuktik e shuga ushkut ye kusine. Ki dulkach ki sakunin no. Kachach uk ki kanda kachwe sakunin sak de yana in lit'a chasinik kakwa chash klik chwacha Cha'achlinuk chani aya.
Okay. Good cheese, huh? Ayati. Okay, Johan. Good cheese. Bakhatsu, Achjiwa. Guksaka. Yakoi Kachshit. Basle Yanach Yagi Achtuasaku. Let's say. Yadu Yaki Aya Hatat Kitachat Hai Yakutan Achtuk Enuch Qat Datuni Achsani Awa Ach Eat Outletu Ade Dukhanye Wichat Nayadi Qat Khishi Qat Akawash Adayeju Tuane Kudoy do Saka Ani Adane Awe Shutakl Awe out to Zakayu Ya Ach Art Ach Lishk Awe Huth Ach Kla do Ish do Glag do Yeet Wush Haswood the Shah Ya Ach Art Claim Tekwe Dichasati Ach Art Yeet Awe Ach Eat out the two Ade Dukhanye Wechat Nagu de awa you do a sakawe achsani. Ye awa achtu ye ke yatatsu achtuasaku atkishi awe chochashi wasachtu ye ke ya kukhacheti wan qanins weqat khuchu qachtu ye ke kakhwa aqawe ach kik du I khoshatu adid du khashia we atkishi. Hukho Konachoe do gin cowdenet. Was Achoe a cowdlachate. Ya Konachoe Kotachea which was Kakaya way at Rishi suck. At Rishi Tish Tleshkatua ashko ye awe ach I aushatu. Tleshkatua ashko ya eight hini akade ye wuti. Just eight chaye kugenki a cook. Aka kunya ki sakshawe kwash naski gi awe. Just tseq. Shoot out the akawe ya ach sunny. Tleshkatua ashko ko a kudach aya wut ayi. We atkan hiti. Akawe kuwashi. We duck. Te wunai atawe. Chaanawe athan. Yewa atla we duck. Kanachawe wuhug. Ya kats aya kutzati a kaye yeti. Ye awe awahash. Yetayach yeti. Aka awe. Ya khasaku wasatu saku at. We you akawagani. You akawsagani ataya. A blowtorch. Le kakainach. We khas atut aya ye awa akawsagan we aksani. Akach aya ay kayis at dituwasagu kaye wuti. Ka tesh keka khan. Tesh dituwa ushku khan wudustini. Just ek. Naski gi anach. Kwash keki aya uwe. Aka yu ayach. Yeka kwati we atkishi. Aka awe kone aya keka. Yende hook. We huchi yagi tuwasagu. We khan aya adaye yeti. Ka keka awe dus I. Shukwaya tesh dus I. Just uwe khan. Ye awe. Ajwe at khan hiti ka at khan ani. You do a sock. Wait atsu. Naidi. Hats akawash. Ye awe hatuwasagu wan kanins. Ye chakuta tsu kutzati. Ye yati a echat. Uwukanichat. Itch atu dus I awe. Wait a konachawe a Yakutan tesliao tu wudlak. Ye tesliao tu dlak. Ya I kliyakutan ko a ya tu wudlak. Ya ach kaniyan ka achun kiyantin. Skut aya. Gwynnell cheese shach tu yake. Yisach wa achi. Gwynnell cheese. Gwella I dat. Gled kak einach aya. Wujin yuk agach tu laat. Ya hayuk atangi da. Aka awe chakuta kagach tu ak. Ye awe chat the cut way. Dech ye gig ko ach tuasagu kagach tu ak. Awe yat ayach. Ye yuk atangi. Atgach tu la yech. Ka adat. Wushu kagach tu laat. Ye awe adeka idul tu ye. Just yuchatan. Yuchaitla a. Akakone klsi din aya yitu de yekakwati. Johan. What's the cut Johan? Yitu ye yiti ye se awe ha yuchatangi. Hatuwasaku ha shantuta ye dudzani awe. Ade yuchadut at ye. Ya hachago kaku has to yach aya hatuwasaku. Wan kanins katlan aya hayukatangi. Katlani hin yachati. Heshwasaka kwati wan kanins just hin kaya ye hayati. Wan kanins hin yik. Wan kanins hin tak. Wan kanins kunakhe hin takka. Ajoy kagach to ak. Gwash yidat aya dis yadi. Dis plain. Kukaha dis. Ye ade. Tsukagach to ak. Wanani sawe jagach to nakawe kled kayu katangi. Ka aya yagach to tlak yashingit. Kaka kwati ko a. Just yigukik to yikakwati. Yeo achtu wasago yigukik to kena sakaya hayu katangi. Aka awe yitu dach ayatsu. Just su yu kagachi la at ka awe yiguk kayi tlakayi. Kayituwu. K'eka aya. Dahisaku aya da dahsawe klingit. Nilchish. Kitin kai ako. Nilchish. So we'll open it up for dialogue
Oh.
in English.
Hi. Sorry, I had one. I just wasn't sure if everyone else went.
Oh, Gook.
If that's okay. Okay. Disc dleyi ak ideya nahen. Disc ge ijiu. Click disc tles akji. Atlun ge yigut. Click. Tachtu adi. Dech chatain. I don't know how to say this one, but Kaftlis K na chan. And this one again. Yak e a. Yek na good. Ye kushi. Awahash. Ya khana disk leyi gachtucha. Because like they basically saw two moose, but sometimes when a moose is too big, like it starts to like stink and stuff. So I try to tell that in a story.
Okay, gonna choose ka. Okay. Kanahu ke Johan. Kanahu ke. So now we'll reflect a little bit just on things we heard, things we said. I just believe you just keep using language and it's just going to keep gaining momentum. It's really what I was talking about. The more you hear it, it resonates inside your ear, and then your brain and your body and your spirit and your ears and your mouth, everything, it starts to sort of really start to figure out what it sounds like, what it is, this Tlingit language. Anybody got any thoughts or questions about stuff we said and heard?
I have one because I heard someone else use the same phrase, the it's fragrant. Is that for food?
Yeah, that would.
I was the one who used that.
Yeah.
What did I think it said what I interpreted as it smells good. Yeah.
Yucky.
Oh.
Shit.
Yeah, I think when I did mine, I was fortunate enough, I get tutored by Noea, who's an advanced, but I get tutored by him in math. And I was like, hey, do you think I could run this by you? And so we actually got to like, he showed me like the different ways of incorporating like different things that I never noticed before. And it was just like a pattern I started to see throughout. I was like, oh, I could change this around and I could change this around and it doesn't affect it. And then I was like, okay, I need to pluralize this, and how would I go about that? Because I know hus, how I need to add in hus, but I didn't know where to do that. So I thought that was a really cool opportunity to work with somebody who's in a more advanced, because it was kind of like it stuck a lot more than if I was doing it on my own.
Right.
So I thought that was a really cool opportunity and it was just earlier today, so.
Okay. Well, I will talk to some of the advanced students and also some of the powers that be about setting up some tutoring. I think it'd be fabulous to have open tutor times, both on campus and then also through Zoom, because I think it helps the advanced students as well to hear what folks are trying to do, because they've done it. Then there also might be things where collectively we're like, oh, we're not really sure how to do this type of thing. And then we all kind of bring it to the table and work on it. So yeah, we'll work on trying to get that for the rest of the year so that we can get some days and times and methods together. And even if it's not like, can you fix this? Can you fix it? It's just sort of like sharing ideas and studying together, using the language with each other a little bit more. And all that stuff really, really helps. And so we've been a bit challenged to sort of do more cohort building than we usually do. However, there's going to be some opportunities if anybody wants to do some work I think we're going to have at least one student position available to help coordinate language activities and maybe do some tutoring and maybe coordinate some tutoring. Then we're going to look at the SHI Hayukatangi Dei program, which exists to create future teachers of the language. And they actually have some openings. If anybody's interested in their program, it's a full scholarship program along with summer employment. It does require basically a full-time commitment to do so, but they do have openings to sort of join the cohort. So I just want to let you folks know, and then just sort of brainstorm on some ideas on how to sort of have more language gatherings. There's going to be an immersion gathering in December. I'm not sure how it's going to work exactly yet, but I do know it is going to be, I believe, the 9th to the 13th, somewhere in that range. I'll get some details, share it with you folks, and I think as we get a little bit more familiar with online technologies, we'll also sort of open those online abilities to just sort of be there, at least virtually. Because when we're in these immersion environments, it does really help to sort of, if you use the language as your primary medium of communication, you really start to realize things that you need to figure out how to say.
I was wondering if when we share our sentences, if it would be helpful if we screen shared the written, what we wrote, because I know, like, for some reason, the words on this one I really struggled with, and so if maybe people saw, they would be able to follow better what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I do think that helps, because I think also it goes by pretty fast for everybody, I'm sure. And reading it gives you one more sort of way to absorb it. So I think that'd be a great idea if we start doing that and start sort of just kind of warehousing our sentences. I guess a Google sheet with a different page or whatever it's called for everyone in here. Otherwise, we're just going to have this, or do we just go with one list? I guess we'll sort of look at that maybe in a few minutes, but I think it's a really good idea to look at it as well so that we can hear it and read it, and then it just gives us one more way to absorb.
I guess I have one more question. So I know a lot of the food words, if they aren't traditional foods and we're just using English, I did see in the Nash dictionary a word for sugar that was shuga, but then I also saw llynukzi. I think that was in your dictionary. I don't know if that's sweet sand.
Yeah.
So I don't know which one would be more common to use.
I think they're both fine, and we were actually talking about this last night as well. What do we do with new foods, and what do we do with foods that might have offensive names associated with them? Honey is called bee poop. Would be a nice way to interpret that. Soy sauce doesn't have any good names. Kushtashuku is one of them. It's land out of urine, but there's some strong rejections to that one in some places. And same with Chanwan Hini, which is Chinaman water, which is probably even worse than land out of pee just as a name. And so just like looking at the language, sometimes there's some work to be done. And you can just sort of pull things in as well. Like you could say spaghetti, and you could say, you know, these are garlic. And until we figure these things out, it's totally fine if we're using Tlingit grammar to just throw in nouns if we don't have those particular nouns. And then there's some that we could borrow. The Cheo goes back to a story. Maybe we'll do that one we'll do it on Thursday. I'll try to do a slow walkthrough of that story, and then we'll walk back through it again. So I'll tell a short, there's longer versions of it in other places, but I'll tell where that Cheo name comes from. Okay. Yeah, and some of them, there might be a preference for some. I hear people say shuga, and I hear people say tlunksi tleo. It just kind of depends on how folks learned it too. Okay. Let's see. So I think we'll go back to something we were doing, unless folks have other questions. I want to get into sort of finishing this talk on the Tlingit verb and just get us into thinking about the subject switch a little bit. Then we'll go back to a chapter of beginning Tlingit and sort of start walking through some things in there.
Just quickly, would I just send you an email in regards to more info on the SHI program?
Yes. So if you're interested in the Hayuk Atangi Day, we just had a meeting today and they just said there's some extra funding, there's some openings. I'll have a flyer and some other stuff, but if you're interested, you let me know. I could pass along your information to the folks that are coordinating the program.
Okay, so just an email is fine.
What's that?
Email's fine?
Yeah, email's fine. Email's just fine. So there is a group of about 18 scholars who are on a path to become language teachers. I believe probably, I don't know the exact numbers, 10 or 11 of them are studying Tlingit. There's 3 or 4 are studying Smalgich, and then there's 3 or 4 studying Khatkil. So it's neat to have all 3 languages involved. It's a program that has, I think, some real benefits. So you get an assessment to your language skills, and then you continue to be assessed. You have summer internship opportunities, and then it's the goal is to do like a full teacher preparation program too. So over the past 2 years, we've developed a series of courses designed to help people build their understanding of how language revitalization generally works, study effective language revitalization networks, and then to go and intern with a teacher, and then eventually begin teaching yourself. So that's the whole goal of the program, is to make language teachers. And so it's been a really fun program. It's been extremely challenging, as everything has, with COVID and the protocols that we're following with it. But I think it's going good as far as folks are progressing along. Okay.
Sheesh.
Okay. Let's talk about these verbs. So again, a verb comes down to 2 parts, a prefix and a stem. That stem is going to contain the meaning, and it's also going to have what we call stem variation, which is all about the vowel. Is it tin, teen, teen? It's going to switch, right? So you could say shatin, watch it. That's a command form. And you could say shatin, I'm going to watch it. And I could say shatin, I'm not going to watch it. So that one was short and high. The second one was long and high. The third one was long and low. So as we think about a verb stem, we have to remember to focus on the vowels. If it's short, keep it short. If it's long, keep it long. If it's high, keep it high. If it's low, keep it low. These are really important, right? Tin, teen, teen, and just learning. So the first step is sort of like watching a verb and just paying attention. Just as you look up some verb, if you look up something like huacha, you're like, hey, look at that. It's long and high. Okay, right on. I think that's where you start with this stuff, is you just take note of it. Start looking for some patterns and just start remembering, okay, when I say this verb this way, it's short and high. Just trying to remember that stuff. You're going to start looking at this stuff. You're going to start remembering, and then we're going to give you the keys to unlock all the patterns. But the patterns have a lot of components to them, so we just kind of do them a little chunk at a time. The prefix, ask questions if you got them. Ask questions if you got them. is going to contain transitivity. Is there an object? Does the verb happen to something? Is there a subject? Does something do the verb? Are there both? Are there neither? Is there just one or the other? And we'll pay attention to that stuff because then it'll tell us how we can change the verb and what kinds of things we need to remember about how it changes. Can we start saying, I did it, you did it, they did it, we did it, y'all did it, they all did it, people do it, or did it? And then do we say, happened to me, happened to you, happened to them, happened to us, happened to y'all, happened to them all, happens to people, happens to something. And did it to themselves. Those are all the sort of various possibilities. There's a few more, but again, we just do building blocks, right? It's like I was learning Hawaiian. And then we learned like the first person possessive pronoun, to say like my. And then we felt pretty good. So there was my, your, and then their. But then there was us two, you two, them two. So they have duals. Then there's us more than two, y'all more than two, them all more than two. So it's like, whoa, singular, dual, and plural. Cool. Then they have a one where they could say us and you, and they could also say us but not you. So they have an inclusive and an exclusive first person plural pronouns. So it's like, whoa, more layers. Then someone told me Hawaiian was really simple. I was like, get out of town. You didn't even know Hawaiian. And so then there's then we learned when you go to especially the first person, there's 3 different ways to say it. Because a person has what they call there's this thing called a pico, which really means a belly button. But the person actually has 3 of them. They have the belly button, then they have they have a pico for their head, then they have a pico for their groin. And the head one is associated with, let's see if I can remember. The head one was associated with kind of the spiritual world and the thought world. The belly button one was connected to ancestors, because how your mama fed you. And then the groin one is connected to future generations, because that's how you make them. And there's a vowel associated with each one. So when you say my thing, you have to pick which vowel and how it's associated with you. So it's like, whoa, this is amazing. But what was fun and why I brought that up, because they taught us how to say my whatever. And then we started talking to other Hawaiian language learners and teachers. They said, did they tell you there's 3 ways to say that? We said, no. And that's the thing of like learning things in stages. So nothing's being withheld from you, but we're just sort of putting the information out one piece at a time. Here's a subject, let's change that around. Here's an object, let's change that around. Here's both, let's change them both around. But we're going to build up to stuff like that. Everybody okay? This thing we call the thematic prefix is really, you could put a noun into a verb. Put a hand in there, put a head in there, you can put an eye in there, you can put a finger in there, you can put a foot in there, you could put a horizontal surface or a vertical surface in there, the end of something. So you'll see these things, and those change the way the verb functions. I would say when you look at transitivity, and the thematic, and the classifier, those 3 things have one thing in common. When I say the classifier, I'm talking about the classifier group. If you change the classifier group, if you put a thematic prefix in there, if you change whether or not there's objects or subjects, you will make a new verb. It's a different verb, not the same verb. The conjugation is these small prefixes that pop up usually in certain combinations to get something. It's like a little combination, not really a lock, but like if you turn this thing on and this thing on and this thing on, future. Just this thing, perfective. This thing plus this thing, hortative. So there's certain combinations that you learn how to put together. And what gets tricky is all this stuff is all in the prefix and it smushes together in a variety of ways that are predictable, but you're going to learn, to be honest, thousands of combinations of the way these things get put together. But we'll sort of just start walking you through what these things do. This plus this, you're going to get that. That plus that, you're going to get this. Then there's the classifier. It has a lot of functions for Tlingit. It also exists in Navajo, Apache, Tagish, Shoshone. Like all the Dene languages are going to have this in some form or another. Dena'ina, Gwich'in, we all have classifiers. We'll take a look at what that thing does in a few minutes. There's these groups, and then within the group, it can move. Any questions?
Did you bring those little cheat sheet things?
No, I'll get them on the break though.
Okay.
And I got these little books for you all too. So
Okay, cool.
those of you online, send me. I probably have it. I could probably look it up. I'm lazy. Send me your address. Plus, sometimes people sign up. Here's something. If you ever become a professor, sometimes people sign up and that's not the place where they live. So you can't just look up the address and mail them something. And also sometimes people sign up for classes or whatever, and that's not even their email address. So like there's these kind of rules we gotta follow as professors. And one of the things about being a language teacher is like protecting your folks' information. And it gets tricky. Because someone will say, how's my nephew doing in the Tlingit class? And I can't say anything. Even if nephew never comes to class or nephew does the greatest, doesn't matter. My response, ask him. I can't tell you anything about how students do. So I did have a student years ago in different classes teaching academic writing. Smart student, talkative, participated in a lot of stuff. Never turned in a single thing. So I sent an email. I said, hey, you're doing great. I appreciate everything you bring to class. But if you don't turn stuff in, you're going to fail. That was Mama's address. So the email went to his mom. So she's like, what? And I was like, oh, no. It's technically a violation. So I had to write, I was like, I'm so sorry. This is the email address that's on the record. So I had to talk to the student and say, you better change that to your email address. However, the student turned in everything after that. So anyways, give me your address if you don't have, I don't have very many of these cards. I'll try and get some more of these little cards made up. I think I went by like, I did little business cards, but I think they're too small. They're fun because you could carry them around, but everything's so tiny. So I might have to rethink that so that really the card should really just be this. I think this is the most important thing for right now. Maybe on the back I'll put something else.
This is a good size.
Like the size of a phone?
Everyone's got one, right?
Yeah, right. And you can. So the one thing that I did do, I did something. If you go to our class webpage, so clinkitlanguage.com, I'll make this a little bigger. You go to Learning Tlingit and Intermediate Tlingit. I gotta change all of these to Tlingit. There's more stuff to do. But if you do scroll down, this is it right here. So if you basically, as you sort of scroll down, what I typically do is every night, usually, after class, I'll go and I'll write down the dates. I'll summarize what kinds of things we talked about. I'll upload any handouts that we sort of went over, and including, I guess you can't see this, but this is
Oh, the story.
Susie James. It's the story. So with this, let me reshare the screen and turn the sound on, folks. Share sound. So with this, if you hit this little play button, it should play. So you can listen to it. If you're on I don't think this other button works with like a phone or a tablet, but if you're on a computer, if you hit this button, you can download the file yourself. So feel free, download all the audio you want. Then you have the printed version here, walk around, listen to it. Then these images that are on here, this is the image, and if you click on it, it should bring you to a full-size version of the image. So like, it's pretty good size. I think this is 13 by 19 inches or something if you were to just print it from here. So then you can right-click it and do a save as, and you can keep it, like you can have it on your phone and stuff. But I will look up some ways to sort of have some print versions that are about the size of a postcard or a phone. Too small, can't read it. Too big, it gets crumpled up and it's kind of awkward to carry around. We're going to sheesh for the reminder. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay. So going through these are the three categories that affect the transitivity of the verb. Who's doing it? Who is it happening to? Those types of things. And it has to go some of these things before the verb. It's what we call the preverb. It means it appears right before the verb, but it cannot be separated from that verb without changing its meaning. The object, so the one that it happens to, comes first. Then you go thematic, conjugation stuff, subject. So if you ever have ka or sha or ya, j, any of those things in the verb, those will always come between the object and the subject. Cow, sh, hit. Right? Chat, ki, ya, nik. You told on me. So the object pronouns, a couple things to remember with these. So as you go through this list, if there's nothing on the end of it, it's written as its own word. Chat should be its own word. Ha should be its own word. Yi, ka, ut, and sh. Those are all written as their own separate words, disconnected from the verb. It's still part of the verb. It's technically in that preverb area. That's all we mean by preverb is separate word, totally connected to it. If it has a hyphen, that means it is written as part of the verb. Ikachwanik, I told on you. So then the ikachwanik. Okay. Any questions on those? We're going to look at examples. So they're listed right here. Then we'll start looking through examples. The first go through with this slideshow is like, just look at them. Look at what they look like. Look at what happens. Start to think about the patterns that might be there. Then we'll go back to beginning, do some other stuff that's a little bit more familiar. Then we're going to come back and start looking at some other things as well. Like what happens when you really start to change these things? Once you look at a verb and you have these things down, you should be able to use that verb in quite a few ways, right? And we'll look at how that works.
Oh, just a quick question.
Huh?
So I wanted to pluralize teachers. So kuat latum a is the noun of teachers. And I was just wondering, like, the has is like the plural, right? And I found that on here and going through. But I was talking about them showing me how to make manic. So I had two different competing verbs. I didn't know like for the cooking or the teaching on what would like how that would lay out. So I just kind of
Yeah.
did it, but
So for something like that, and think it does get a little bit interesting when we sort of start thinking like, what part do we pluralize and how do we do those things? Like for this one, so this sentence right here is doing something similar, right? So this is one that I could change to do basically just what you were talking about. So I'm going to isolate this sentence, and then if you folks can tell me what does this sentence say? If there's any parts that you're not sure about, let me know, and I could tell you. But what parts do we recognize on here? You would say amtlitu as opposed to outlitu, and I would not write those backwards. Okay. Achsani awe ach it outlitu ade duchan ye rechat. Anything we recognize in there?
My uncle.
My uncle, my paternal uncle, leaves us with here. Forget awe, that's just sort of saying,
it's like a comma.
yeah, or just saying like that, it just puts a little attention on what we just said, or a little separation between what we're going to say next.
Oh, shoot.
My brother.
There's no brother in there, but we do have this eat.
Eek. Okay, I was just thinking eek, but okay.
Help?
It is built into help. So this is something we're going to learn how to recognize and to use. But there's this thing on here we call an empty base. It doesn't mean anything. It only exists so we can put a suffix onto some things, usually a directional suffix. So if you're saying towards me or next to me or these other things, you're going to end up sometimes with ach, I, or ach, I, de, ach, I, dach, those types of things. In this case, ach, it, to me, arriving to me. This verb, there's three ways you could say it depending on where you're from. Auchletu, umchletiu, or auchletiu. I don't know if Tesson says tiu or tu. Tu, okay. What is this one? Anybody recognize it?
Read,
What's that?
read, to
Not-
read.
No, there is a read one, yes. This verb root is to count, to read, or to teach. So in this case, with this particular classifier root combination, taught me. Ach it auchletu. So when someone teaches you something, typically what you're going to do is sort of, often I see a construction like this. So this is not the most common verb. So the verb root is on, and you might have heard on hiti. Has anybody ever heard on hiti?
Fire is on.
Well, on, but they sound similar. And so on hiti is a smokehouse, and this is the verb for smoking fish. And so just gear yourself up. Tlingit does this a lot. We have specific verbs for specific things. You want to talk about swimming? Okay, is it a person swimming? Are they going overhand? Is it a beaver swimming? Is it a fish swimming? Is it a pod of killer whales? Is it a pod of, or collection, what do you call a little group? Herd? Sea lions? Right, so it's going to change depending on the thing. That's one of the reasons why it's called a classifier, because the language is always classifying. It's like this type of thing, that type of thing, this type of thing. But what you'll learn is there's this way to put things together with this ade, de, So you're going to use a fourth person pronoun, a verb, yeah, the way people verb. And this is how you're going to take care of a lot of this stuff. So like if I was going to say the way to cook, a de dus I, yeah, right? And we'll learn how to do that. It's a little bit tricky. There's a few rules to it. But in terms of like the way those things would be handled, then this verb itself does not have to pluralize it. It doesn't have to pluralize. It goes to this fourth person. That's what Lingi does with the fourth person. It's like the way this thing happens, the way to do this thing. So in this case, my uncle taught me how to smoke fish. So if I were to pluralize this, I would need to do two things. I would need to pluralize the noun. So what am I doing? So I'd say ach, sunny, hus, away. So now I have added this type of hus. This is a little different than the one on that card. This one pluralizes kinship terms. It just happens to sound the same as some of the other ones. And then you would say ach, eat, because it's still just me. And now I would say has tu. That's the part where I would pluralize the verb. It gets a little tricky because this has is linked to a subject in there, which is unmarked. So the third person does get a little confusing because you have unmarked things that get pluralized with has instead of having, you could say ha or tu, I or we.
Is has only for kinship? Could you use that for pluralizing teachers, other people?
No, so yeah, it's just for kinship. But what we'll do, what I thought we'd do after the break, since it's fitting timing, because it's like, what are we gonna work on today? We're gonna learn how to pluralize a noun. We'll learn how to do that today. So if it's a common noun, it's got a way to pluralize. And we'll look at that after we do a few of these verbs and take a break. And thanks for asking questions. Like, that's how we absorb the stuff. Okay. Here we go. The subjects are the ones who do it, right? So, ha, tu, I, ye. The third person, which could be they or it, is always unmarked. There is never, ever a pronoun there. It just goes to this sort of default form of the verb. It gets pretty, you can get some really short verbs that sometimes sound a little, they get used to saying them, right? So for example, you wouldn't really say it. I guess maybe you'd say, chata, I'm sleeping. Ita, you're sleeping. Ta, they are sleeping. That's this whole verb, ta. So you can say, gusu ik. Where's your brother? Ta, he's sleeping. That could be a whole answer to that question. Right? And then you have du, the fourth person. And these are all of your subject options. There's a couple more object pronouns. Don't worry about them until later. So we'll look at some of these in action. Maybe we'll do a few of these verbs. I guess it's getting near break time. We should probably take a break before we do the classifier again. Maybe a short break, if that's all right. So take 7 minutes. How about that? 7 minutes, come back at quarter till. We'll pick up on the classifier. We'll do one of these verbs, maybe two, and then we'll switch over to the suffixes. Cheesh.
Sheesh.
Hey. Okay. So, classifier, every verb has one. At the least, a verb must have a classifier and a stem. Right? So We'll always have a prefix and a stem. Classifier has to be there, even again if it's this unmarked thing like ta. Ta has a classifier, but if we move it to the perfective, it's going to switch to ya. You're going to get wu ta. Ta, wu ta. So there's a couple things to keep in mind. One is that there's these 4 groups. The verb will belong to, it'll say, take this group of classifier, put it with this stem. Now you've got a verb. This one plus ke, you have yak-e, kesh-uk-e. This one with t, you have sati and kesh-usti. This one with tsin, you have chitzin, kesh-ushtin. This one with kain, you're going to have atwujakain, kesh-atwushkain. So one is, it's not going to switch the group. It's going to move within the group. Okay, so just remember, like once you see, it'll be marked as 0, S, L, S, H. You'll see that when you look up the verb. You'll see the verb root. Just to the left of that, you'll see what the classifier is. As far as the way that it moves, is it has its kind of natural state. We could think of it as having a natural state. And then you can add this I component. It's like you turn a switch. What that switch does when you put this I in there is it says the verb has happened, or we're talking about it as if it has happened. Those are the 2 things, happened or talking about it as if it has happened. So in this case, kesh-uk-e, yak-e. That's why whole bunch of state verbs for something to be a certain way. Yak-e, yanik, chitzin. Right? You'll see these things in there. The I would mean it has happened. Otherwise it hasn't. Even if you say future like going to happen, but it hasn't happened yet, so it's going to be in this form right here. So we will learn which verb modes push the classifier in which direction. There's only a few of them that are actually plus I. So. The other thing is there can be what we call the D component built into the classifier. The most common reason for that is that the subject is also the object. I see myself. I talk to myself. I did it to myself. Go do this to yourself. Those would all be plus D verbs. Some verbs are just naturally plus D, to converse. I'm talking and listening. So that's a plus D type of verb. So those are things. Some of them are just, if you look at the classifier and it says D plus 0, your options are going to be D or da. D plus S, it's going to be Z or S. Otherwise, you can add the D if you, so there's certain things that might trigger that. To do it to yourself, sometimes the 4th person will push all of the S, SH, and L classifiers plus D. That's a lot to take in. So again, what do you do for now? When you look at a verb, try and figure out what the classifier is. Oh, okay, that looks like an S classifier, and there's an I in it. It's one of those S ones. Oh wait, it went to sa. Okay. So for example, ich setin, I see you. Suye ik kwa setin, I will see you. Si, sa, si, sa. Okay? That's all that the classifier does. It does those things. There's one additional thing. There are some verbs that have an object and you could remove the object to focus on the action. For example, what are you doing? Khatu. I'm reading this. There's a it there. I'm reading it. Khadatu. I'm reading. I'm just reading, right? So the focus goes onto the action. Another common one for that is you could say, Tatke shishjini khwaka. Yesterday, I sewed a vest. So there's an it there. There's a thing. If there's no, you're saying, someone says, what did you do last night? Khwadaka or khwadaka. Sort of. I sewed. I was sewing. So it's more about the action and not about the doing it to something. And you'll see some examples of that. Any questions about the classifier?
Okay. Kwasiku, klefwasaka.
Yes.
Sisa.
Yep.
There's one on there. Is that because it's the negative?
Yes. So all negative forms will always be minus I. Kwasiku. It's already happened. I came to know it. You can't know it unless you know it. Klefwasaku. I don't know it. Si, sa, si, sa. It's going to move back and it's going to move like that. These ones are going to be positive perfectives and positive state verbs in what we call the imperfective, for it to be that way right now. Okay. Well, let's look at this stuff in action. This is very abstract until we see it in action, I think. Here's this verb, root cha, which means to eat. We're going to go over these things that you will see when you look up a verb in the dictionary these days. So when you look it up, you're going to see a capital O, capital S, this zero marker, this root marker, cha, and a little number 1. Not asking you to do calculus, but it is coding a bunch of information for you. What is this capital O thing doing?
Objective.
Object.
Object. So you go back to this list, you could put any of these object pronouns in there. You gotta be careful because it's eating, like, right? So I could say, Khat you're eating me, like maybe I'm a potato or something. What about this capital S?
Subject.
Subject. So back to this list, you could put any of those in there. There's a whole bunch of verbs that do have an object. It's pretty much always it. Eating it, planting it, writing it, drawing it. So it's going to stay third person almost all the time for a lot of these. What about this zero marker? What does this tell you?
Classifier.
Yep. So you're going to have zero or ya. Hasn't happened, happened. Hasn't happened, happened. Then you get the root mark. This just says, here's that verb root, just so we can help remember that's what we're seeing. Cha is the verb root. And what about this little number 1? Any ideas?
It means there's more than one verb.
There's some other verb root, cha, which is paddling, right? That's all it's saying. It says there's a homonym, this one is that one, and the other one is the other one, right? Cha, cha. Okay.
So it's talking about the same verb, but it's used in a different context.
Well, like saying this is cha to eat.
Mhm.
There's a separate verb root, cha, to paddle.
Okay.
So you'll run into those. Some of them, there might be 4 or 5 of them. And you just have to keep track. Right?
But will the second verb have potentially a different classifier?
In this case, they're the same. But there's ways to tell. So usually it often will. But then sometimes you might have 2 verbs that just sound exactly the same. Like you can say awacha, and you need context from that, because that could mean they ate it, and that could mean they were paddling. But yeah, Often it's pretty rare for you to have like two verbs that would then conjugate exactly the same. But most people will get it from context. Okay. The next chunk of information comes in parentheses. The first little piece of information is going to say either 0, na, ga, or qa. This is really starting to unlock the way the verb works. Every tlingit verb will belong to one of these 4 types of action. It's really interesting to sort of think about. It's going to be, we call it the conjugation type or the conjugation class. They kind of have meaning built into them. Sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's not. A 0 verb usually is associated with having some definitive ending, some kind of goal. The na type of verb is more like it's an ongoing thing. Not to say it's never ending, but it's not focused on sort of reaching some sort of goal or finish. Ga is an upward type of thing. Qa is a downward type of thing. This is going to affect how you start moving the verb around. One example will be the command forms. If I command someone to eat it, I'll say kha. If I command someone to go to sleep, I'll say nata. If I command someone to stand up, I'll say gitahan. If I command someone to sit down, I'll say qanu. So those will pop up in the command form. They will pop up in other more advanced forms like a hortative, let it happen, let me do it, let them do it, some other things like that. But they will affect the verb in terms of how we start to move it around. So it's one more piece of information that you have to remember. In addition, there are 5 types of verbs: action, event, state, motion, position. It will state it right here. Usually an act verb is for something to do something to something else. It's often going to have a subject and an object. You're going to be able to put it into a lot of different verb modes. And it's going to usually have something to do with some kind of action. Eating, hitting, pushing, An event verb is for something to happen. It's a little bit different than an act in that there's a time when it hasn't happened and a time after, but there's no true time when it hasn't, there's no in between. You don't know it, and then you know it. That type of thing. It didn't blow up, and then it blew up. There's no particular time, so you can't have what we call an imperfective, which is in the process of happening. A state verb is for something to be a certain way. They're pretty often, they only have an object. Khatyake, khatyanik, khatletzin, khatyaksaan, like whatever you want to say. Khatlechan. What do I say? I'm good, I'm strong, I'm handsome, I'm stinky. So I'm all those things, right? So, but those were all state verbs, or something to be a certain way. Then you have motion verbs, which I think are the trickiest of the bunch. The reason why they are tricky is because they can actually switch their conjugation type depending on the type of motion. So for example, the verb we might hear, wugut, they went there, or they went. You could say adenagu, go over there. You could say neshgu, come in. You could say yagagu, walk. And I could say qaku, go down there. They also tend to change once you pluralize the verb. You go from wugut to haswuat. So they go through some set of change when they pluralize. Sometimes it does get really tricky. Then it just gives you a reminder of the transitivity. It's transitive means there's an object and a subject. Object in transitive, there's only an object. Subject in transitive, there's only a subject. Impersonal, there's neither. There's no object, no subject. After that, you'll get the definition for S to eat O. And this is important to keep note of. We were messing around with this verb last night in advanced Tlingit for someone to get a shot of medicine. And we're moving it all around. I gave you a shot. They gave me a shot. I got a shot. The doctor gave me a shot. We're moving all around, just trying to mess around with it. But the shot part was the object. So when someone tried to change that to say chat, I was like, oh, it's like you got injected into someone, like that movie where someone shrunk down real tiny, got injected into a person. Look at these things in action unless you folks have any questions. And all of this stuff, we will gradually unpack it. It's a lot to take in. A Tlingit verb is a very powerful thing that changes in a lot of different ways. We're going to just do it one step at a time. You got the whole verb database to just go look stuff up for now. Figure out like word order and how to start saying stuff. But then we're going to teach you how to put this stuff together so you don't even need no books. Be a totally off book. I'm just talking.
Quick question. In the past, I think I remember being in one of your classes at Brooks Brook for one day. I went with my Claw, and I remember there was you said imperfective, but there's also perfective in the Tlingit, right? Would that be one of these 5, or is that something totally different?
Good question. So if you take one of these verbs, we'll go look in the database to sort of take a look at this. So here's Chrome. So here's our verbs. So we're going to go down to cha and go see what this thing looks like. So I got close this, close that. Scroll way down to cha. And so we see right here, eat, transport, or paddle. We'll open up the eat, and we have eat it, which is the one we're looking at. We're going to open that one up by clicking in the yellow. So this is a 0 type verb. It is an act verb. But then the verb itself can move through the modes. We call them modes. In English, they call them like tense, past tense, present tense, future tense. In Tlingit, the term we use is a verb mode. Some of them have fancy names. And we're trying to sort of just talk about that because sometimes it helps, but don't feel like if I can't remember which one's perfective, habitual, and the potential attributive, some of the names don't make a lot of sense. What's important is what does it do for the meaning? So there's this one we call imperative or the command form. This is saying do the verb, commanding someone to do that. Then you have a prohibitive, don't do the verb. An imperfective, doing the verb, or the verb is happening, or it is that way. Imperfective negative, not doing the verb, not that way. Progressive imperfective, in the process of doing the verb. We're not going to worry about these other ones because they're uncommon. We're going to start with, I say start with the 3 that I like to focus on is imperfective, positive and negative, perfective, which means it happened, it became that way. Negative perfective, it didn't happen, it didn't become that way. Future, will happen, will be that way. Negative future, won't happen, won't be that way. There's quite a few others, but I'd say those are the ones you need to communicate, right? Telling stories, talking about what's going to happen, what you're going to do. You will start to figure out how like the hortative works and the other ones, these habitual type of things, it gets pretty wild. But that's what when we start saying perfective, imperfective, and stuff, we were strictly talking about the mode. So every verb, you have this is what we call the theme. It's like the skeleton. It's like saying, here's the thing, and you can build it some way by changing the transitivity, who's doing it, to whom it's happening, and then the mode. Are we talking like, and it's wild because it doesn't have to do with time. It's just sort of saying, are we talking about it happening or not happening? Are we talking about did it happen, didn't it happen? Now we're talking about going to happen, not going to happen. So this is what we call an event-driven language. And the only reason I bring that up is because there's some things you're going to say that you're saying right now, but it's a perfective form. Oudagon, umdagon. Ausaku, umsaku. Those work for right now, and those also work for in the past. And I think once we start really sort of getting into this stuff, it's kind of intense, sometimes a little disorienting, but then we just go and we start looking at some examples. Everything's going to be okay. But, you know, just learning how to sort of put this stuff together does help unlock a lot of stuff. Yeah, away. Gonna cheesh. Yeah, so English has both mode and tense. Okay. Okay. Let's look at how we can change this verb. We'll do some pretty common ways to say it. And the classifier is either going to be 0 or ya. And we'll just see how the classifier changes. We'll also see how changing the subject impacts that verb. So we're focusing on a few things here. For person, we're going to go first person for I'm doing it. Second person, you are doing it. Third person, they are doing it. We're going to do a command. We're going to do an imperfective. We're going to do a perfective. And we're going to do a future. We're not worried about negatives right now. Do it, doing it, did it, will do it. Okay. So I think I'll entertain guesses, or predictions if you want to predict how to say the thing. Anybody know how you would tell someone, eat it?
Hija?
Yeah, eat it. So eat it would be cha. Everybody say it. Cha. 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 What about I am eating it?
Jaja?
Yeah, oh when? Cha cha.
Jaja?
Cha cha.
Jaja?
Cha cha.
Jaja?
So let me tell you, if you want to take a solid guess. But also remember, this tone is going to go sometimes high, sometimes low. So if you're not sure, you just power through how you think it should be, because it's okay to take a prediction. And if you're not sure, you just say, guaxie. So just throw that on the end. Guaxie. There's your shrug if you need to shrug a little bit. Okay. You are eating it. Hija.
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 So there is an it right there. There is an it right there. In both of those cases, it will be unmarked. But you have to know it's there because in the third person, you can't have 0, 0, ha. So the first 0 will convert to a. That third person will say, hey, object, change yourself. So that's what you're going to get here. They are eating it.
Aha.
Aha,
Mm.
aha,
Aha.
aha,
Aha.
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 And also see that the imperfective version of this verb, short and high, ha, 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 all the way through. That's what that verb stem is doing. The stem is talking about the vowel. I ate it.
Chawha.
Hua-ha,
Ha.
Hua.
hua-ha,
Hua.
hua-ha,
Hua.
hua-ha.
Hua.
You ate it. Yeah. Iyaha,
Iyaha.
iyaha,
Iyaha.
iyaha,
Iyaha.
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 So for this next one, it's going to also be long and high. Ha is how it's going to end. They ate it.
Ayaha.
Awa.
Oh.
Awaha,
Awaha.
awaha,
Awaha.
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 So this will work the same for zero verbs, right? So this, to go back, this was a zero act verb. That is the reason why you get iya in the middle for that one. For other ones, you're going to get ye. So that's why you got to there's like this, what type of verb it is important. However, once you learn how to put these prefixes together, you could use a whole bunch of different verbs in here, right? Depending on what the verb is. So I could say, chwachash, I cut it. Chwacha, I ate it. Chwagud, I went. I'll think about it. Chwata, I slept. But the stem in that is, it's gonna change a little bit, and we're gonna get to how to predict what the stem will be. For now, what you look at, you say, okay, in the perfective, this verb is long and high. Just gotta remember that for now, until I learn the rules, because like you could, it's a step-by-step sort of thing. One is we're learning these verbs and how to use them. And so some of that is memorization until we learn all the steps that help put it together. Last group. I will eat it.
Kakwaka.
Kakwaha,
Kakwaha.
kakwaha,
Kakwaha.
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 You will eat it.
Cookwaha. Oh, cook ye. Ooh.
Ah,
Ha.
Gagik. Gagik.
yeah, we're going to actually use that form of it. So hold on. Kaqiha,
Kakaiha.
kaqiha,
Kakaiha.
kaqiha.
Kakaiha.
And I think we're going to use this form too. Sorry. Kukaha, or say kukaha,
Kaha.
Kukaha.
Kakaha.
kukaha.
Kakaha.
Ha.
They will eat it.
Akwaha.
Yeah, awe. Akwaha,
Akwaha.
akwaha,
Akwaha.
akwaha.
Waha.
So as we look at this, we see the verb changing quite a bit. Cha, cha, icha, acha, chwacha, iyacha, awacha, kukacha, gakicha, akwacha. The prefix is changing quite a bit. The stem is changing a little bit less. If you just look at the stem, cha, 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 cha. So what we really learn to do is put together the prefix, figure out what the stem is going to be. It does take time. We'll just look through a whole bunch of examples and just sort of look at what they're doing, but also figure, like, these are useful verbs.
So
So on the phone, what are you doing? Ha ha, I'm eating. Oh, go ahead.
I have a question about the object. So here we have the it. So if you wanted to state it, if you want to say hot, ha, you don't change anything in the verb, you just could put the object in front of it?
Yeah, so you end up with an indirect object just by naming it. It does not affect the verb. Could be gli, chat, hamburger, whatever you're eating, it's still it. However, there is a way to, there's a different but related verb where you lock the object up with ut. And that would mean I am, like if you said at chwacha, I'm eating, or I ate, right? So if the focus isn't on the thing, not about it. So like someone offers you some food, you can say de at chwacha, I already ate. You better take that food anyways, don't be rude. But yeah, that's a good question. In English, like a lot of times, like you would say, I ate it, I ate fish. Like, so it would substitute for that pronoun. You could just sort of knock it out. You don't need it anymore. I saw it, I saw a dolphin, right? So you can substitute that noun and take the pronoun away. For Tlingit, the pronoun must remain there. Okay, we'll do something a little bit different. And we'll run out of time, but we'll pick this up on Thursday. The grammar stuff is just like little baby steps. We'll just keep looking at examples, keep asking questions as you think of them, because I think that helps you to digest it. And then we'll keep going through, and we'll just look at a whole bunch of verbs. And your mission right now is to sort of look at those verbs, memorize the patterns, but then also to start to look for things, look for clues that reveal the ways you can predict these things. Okay. So to start thinking about nouns and how to alter a noun in Tlingit. So we're going to alter a noun. There's different ways you can do that. You can use adjectives to change like what kind of noun. So you can have a fast thing, a slow thing. You can have an old thing, a young thing, a will be thing, a used to be thing. You can also pluralize it, make it small, and you can have little smalls, and then you can have a possessive or relational suffix. We're going to learn how to do all of those things with a whole bunch of examples. Starting with, there are different types of nouns. So a lot of times I'll try to mark those in the dictionary. So you have just a common noun, yeich, that doesn't come from any other thing that is the name of that thing. These are usually one-syllable words. Kuch, yeich, tak, kutz, tzik. Like, however the thing worked, somebody came up with a name for that thing, and that's just what it's called. You can also have a compound, which is usually a series of nouns that run together. Gun is firewood, tu is inside, tuk is a worm. Gun to tuk is a woodworm. Using that pattern, based on what they came up with in Hawaii, which was pune puke, we came up with a word for nerd, Because we have people who are like, we're language nerds. We want to have a name. So we call them a bookworm. As a fun way to do it, because when people nerd out on language, they tend to nerd out on big long names like that. But again, is a membrane or paper or a book. T is inside. Is the worm. You also have what we call a relational noun. That means it's a noun, but it needs to belong to another noun. And some of these would be postpositions like on, around, above, below. And they just need to have something there. Like you say da, or you could say da, hit da. So you can put a noun there, but we'll usually mark it with this longer dash, which just says, don't forget there's got to be a noun there. That includes body parts, achjin, dujin, hajin, kajin, katejin, kushtajin. Then you have a noun that comes from a verb. There's a few different ways you can sort of take a verb, make it into a noun. So kashtashi is a typist. And there's a verb, it looks a little different than this, but you could say kauchdash. I typed it. So those are the types of nouns. And it's just good to know, because some of them will have this has a suffix already on there. You'll learn how to spot that suffix, and then you can't put the same type of suffix on there. So, if you're going to say my woodworm, the noun itself would not change. But that's not the case with every noun. Video okay? All right. So let's talk about some rules of sound. Some of you may have seen this before. So there's stuff that you already know how to do in English, and there's a whole set of rules that go with it. And as you sort of learn a language in a kind of a natural way, like especially if it's your first language, you don't have to learn all the rules, right? Like, what did they say? I don't really know the language, but I have a friend who was raising her son, and she would only speak to her son in Spanish. And I was just curious because I didn't have kids at the time, but I was thinking, if I have kids, I'll just speak to them in Tlingit and see what happens. And so we were just hanging out. There's me and this car full of people who were poets. We're all poets. And one of my friends, I was just making conversation. I said, "Oh, so you only talk to your son in Spanish. How's that going?" And she said, "Well, he's dangling his modifiers." And she was kind of disappointed. And so I just laughed because I had no idea what that meant. But I said, I was like, "That's how it starts," That's just being silly. But a lot of times when you teach it, you just sort of listen to a language, and then you usually just correct a child. You let a lot of stuff go, and you correct as you go. But most people, unless they sort of study language, probably don't say, "No, son, that's an irregular verb." The irregular verbs, maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I think a lot of people just say, "No, that one, you just say this." And then they start to get the patterns without having to state what's necessarily going on. For example, if you were to say, we're pluralizing each of these words. In English, we go from cat to what?
Cats.
Cats. Dog, we go to
Dogs.
dogs. And bus, we go to buses. Right? But in English, we put an S, S, and ES, but those are not the same sounds, right? What's the first sound? First sound's an S, right? So there's cats. And the second sound on dog, it's not an actual S, is it?
Z.
It's a Z. And we could change that and say, let's make it a Z. That's how we're going to say it. Let's just spell it like that, right? And what about buses?
Pretty much a yes.
It's an E,
SS.
but we don't
Buses.
say buses, we say buses.
Mm.
So that's also an easy. So English doesn't necessarily, it's not really a phonetic alphabet, so it doesn't say write it as it sounds. It just has these kind of different rules for writing than for sort of how you speak it. But why would these three different sounds do the same thing? Well, they do the same thing, but why would you make three different sounds for cats, dogs, and buses?
Because of the other sounds that are adjacent to them.
Yes, because the sounds that they attach themselves to. So the T, so if you like put your fingers on your neck and you say cat, cat.
That's cat.
That T sound has no vocal cords, so just go ahead and throw an S on there. Tss, T-S, tss, right? Dog, g, g. That is voiced. So in English, in this particular case, the S and the Z are interchangeable sounds. And they're not just interchangeable, but English expects you to use the one that fits. Right? And same with buses. So you can't say bus, you can't just put two S's in a row. So you have what we call a peg vowel to say we got to put something on there, so then we can put a suffix on the end. And because it's voiced, then you need to leave it as a Z. So the rule here is the plural marker in English is an S, but if it has a voiced ending, you use the voiced version of the S, which is the Z. So if we just go back and forth between an S and a Z, and we put our fingers again, like on our neck, we go s. They are the same sound. We just turn our vocal cords on for the Z, right? This stuff is important because Tlingit's going to have a whole set of rules that work just like this. Is there a question or thought? Okay. So in Tlingit, we have a noun. I was told the word in Tlingit for a noun would be asayi. Everybody say it. Asayi.
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 Its name. That's all. You're just saying its name. The name of the thing, what the thing is called. So a noun can have an adjective. In Tlingit, you have two types of adjectives. And I'm pretty sure you can only add one of them to a noun. You have something that comes before the noun, and pre, and you have something that comes after, post. So we usually call these preposition, postposition, right? So there's a whole set of adjectives that could come before the noun, and they must come before the noun. Then you have another list of things that come after the noun. So when you learn how to use adjectives in Tlingit, there's not a whole bunch of them, but you got to learn, is it one that goes on this side or the other side? For example, we have this douche. There was a douche.
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 So now we'll put one adjective before it. We'll put one adjective after it. Sheech douche.
Douche.
Sheech douche.
Huge douche.
Sheech douche.
Huge
Douche.
Sheech, as an adjective, is a non-human female. So you might use this if you're hunting, and you might say, Sheech ziskoe. It's a female, don't shoot it. You could also have douche Sean.
douche Sean.
Douche.
Douche Sean.
Douche. Sean.
Douche Sean.
Douche Sean.
You can have an old cat. So here's a list. This will be the last thing we do for tonight. On the left, here's a list of adjectives that can go before. These aren't all of them. These are just some. Then there's some ones that can go after. So if we had a good cat, we can have ak a douche.
Okay, douche.
We have a strange cat, kasayei douche.
Yay, douche.
A male cat, ka douche.
Douche.
A gigantic monster cat, kustin douche.
Piston douche.
Female cat, sheech douche.
Douche.
A young cat, yeast douche.
Yeast douche.
This one doesn't necessarily make sense, but one that could make sense for this is you could say, ach chuch sak. That's my fiance, or ach shat sak. It's going to become something. Sometimes they'll say ha'atcha yisak, the thing that's going to become our food. So it means it's going to become that in the future. Douche Sean, old cat. Douche Klein, big cat. Douchua, I guess if you saw something that looked like, there's a shark that looks like a porpoise, it's called Chichua. There's a flying squirrel, it's called Kasakua, looks like a squirrel. Ziskli hook, dried moose meat. And then you can also have ach chuch yi, ex-husband, ach shat yi, ex-wife. That's how the adjectives work, is they modify a noun. So that's the first way we can modify a noun. On Thursday, oh wait, hold on. We got to talk about Thursday, since we're out of time. We are not going to be having class on Thursday. There is an optional event for you to watch or to attend. There's going to be a boarding school healing ceremony on Thursday, Sandy Beach in Douglas. It's optional if you would like to view it. There's going to be some Tlingit spoken, but it's a pretty important moment and event when we talk about residential schools and boarding schools. Those absolutely impacted Tlingit. So we are going to have a healing ceremony in a place where children were abused for speaking Tlingit. And some of these, they just recently passed away, some of the ones that really faced it in some of these places. So I want to just sort of consider that. And what I'd like you to do, so we've been composing sentences, we would like you to compose some sentences about boarding schools or residential schools. These are schools that Native American children were often put into, often taken from their homes, but it's also just schools in general, and when people did not allow people to use the language. I know that this is a sensitive subject. I don't want anyone to get overly upset or depressed. There's lots of options out there for us to get help, to explore some things, but I do think it's helpful as a population, both indigenous and non-indigenous, to talk at some of these things to see how we can recover as a group as we look at the impacts that these things have had and perhaps still have, because some of these buildings are still up and we have this memory of them and we have these traumas that sometimes lock us up when we start thinking about speaking. I went out to a community and I saw someone, I was teaching Tlingit, I was like, hey, you should come. He says, no, that person's still right there in my mind. They're gonna hit me every time I speak. That's a reality. I know it's a tough subject, but we also need to use the language to talk about everything. So that's what we're gonna try to do for Thursday. What I'll do is I'll get the link from the organizers. I'll put it on our class webpage. So you'll be able to, you don't have to go if it's cold, if you're worried about being around groups of people. I don't know how large the event is going to be. We are going to hear from someone who is Yen Yedi and who watched people burn his house down so they could put the community of Douglas where the village used to be. It's not an easy thing to talk about, but we're going to give lots of responses in Tlingit. We're going to be using healing aspects of our language during this gathering. It's going to be live streamed. I'm not exactly sure yet how to view it, but I will put a link on our class page so that you'll be able to view it. And Yigoayachwan will also go over again some healing phrases, some other things when we come back on Tuesday. We'll pick up the verb thing that we're walking through and also modifying these nouns. I believe it starts at 5 o'clock, but it might be 5:30. We're a little confused about that. At least I am confused.
Dach Kich Ach, I think would know.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
for sure. She's bringing people, so.
Yeah, and there are, if you need transportation, let me know. I do believe there's some folks who are coming from the campus area to there and trying to arrive somewhere around 4:30. And I think folks are supposed to be there and things begin at 5 o'clock. Well, let me double check real quick.
Do you know if it'll be recorded by any chance?
If there'll be a live stream, it would be very easy.
Usually, yeah, because
Yeah, I think the live stream
later on.
would be an option to watch it. So I'll reach out to Gloria Mary, who's going to be helping coordinate that portion with us.
We're not sharing any. We're sharing just our sentences in class, though.
Yes, you are not going to be sharing your sentences there. You have an entire week to put them together, and we will share them in here. And we'll also talk on Tuesday before class starts on whether we want to have maybe an unrecorded session just for a little bit of additional safety for folks to sort of share some things. But we can make that decision when Tuesday comes around. Let me see. It is 5:30 p.m. Any other questions, thoughts?
Renee, is that the building that used to be, that I think used to have Montessori school in it?
It is a Montessori school.
Same building.
It's a different thing than it used to be, but it is the same building.
Ooh.
That's where Nora Downhauer went to school. That's where Marge Dutson went to school. And both of them had a pretty rough time there. Okay. Gulchish, Yakawe Yejani, Gulchish, Yakecha, Yewushkach Tustin. Let me know if you folks have any questions.
I wanted to see when is the best day for us to send you our stories to kind of like overlook them, because I worked on mine like last night and this morning. So I didn't know if it was like too close to the class to send it to you.
Oh, okay. I'd say send them anytime,
Okay.
and it might not get back to you for a little while. Yeah.
Okay.